Hello and welcome to the AIM UDI Seminar, the pulse of US UDI implementation and global UDI impacts. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'll be going over. First is the AIM North America antitrust policy. AIM North America conducts its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM North America activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. Next is our collaboration and work product policy. AIM North America webinars are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM North America has developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. Also, just some housekeeping slides here. Today's webinar is being recorded. As a registrant, you'll be notified when the recording is available. You'll also have an opportunity to ask the experts at the conclusion of the presentation. Take part in this, please submit questions via the Q&A application, which is at the bottom of the application screen. A little bit about AIM North America. AIM North America is an alliance enabling the cooperation, development, and standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to IoT, AIM North America is your advocate. Any organization with an interest in data collection is a beneficiary of these efforts. Membership provides an opportunity to influence the direction of the industry, develop policies and standards, access market reports, and engage new partners. So I'm very pleased to be here today with several of our speakers. We have Jay Crowley from USDM Life Sciences, Indira Konduri from the FDA, Kevin Kapat from Geisinger, Natalia Wilson from Arizona State University, and Dennis Black from BD. So welcome everyone, appreciate you being here today. And I'll turn things over to our moderator for today's seminar, and that is Jay Crowley, the Vice President of Medical Solutions and Services at USDM Life Sciences. Jay, thank you again for this.
Great. Thank you, Mike. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mike, and to Mary Lou from AIM for hosting today's webinar. Shout out to Janie Yellum as well. For those of us who have been on this UDI journey, you know that she has been herding us along since the beginning. So thank you for all that you've done, Janie. Today's session, I think, is an opportunity. Oh, thank you, Mike. It's an opportunity for us to reflect, right? Anniversaries are an opportunity to look back, reflect on where we've been, and to look forward. Where are we going? What can we do to improve the path that we're on? For those of you who don't know, this past Saturday was the 10-year anniversary of the publication of FDA's UDI system, technically regulation, which was itself about 10 years in the making. So this has been a journey that many of us have been on for a very long time. And if you were lucky enough to be with us on September 24th of 2013 at the UDI conference in Baltimore on day 2, when the rule was published, you'll remember it was, I think, an exciting time for many of us. I think we thought maybe we were kind of done. We published the rule and it was time to move on, but we continued to work on issues and to improve what we've done and look for opportunities for other improvements and uses of UDI. It was interesting. I was reading the original email that I sent to our office director in 2002, suggesting that we needed to work on UDI. There was some things going on around barcoding of pharmaceutical products, which ended up being the FDA's pharmaceutical barcode rule. And we were looking at similar things around medical devices. And there were 3 issues. Why 3? I don't know, but there were 3 issues that I put down that we needed to work on. One was to have a unique identifier for all devices at all levels of packaging. Well, I think to a large extent we have resolved that. We needed a database of manufacturers and their devices. And thank you to Indira and Good ID, we largely have that in place. And for whatever reason, the 3rd issue was for us to really work on what we meant by define unit of use. And for those of you who are still working in this space, you know it's an issue. that we have not yet resolved. So 2 out of 3, not bad, I suppose. Still plenty of work for us to do. So as you can see from the agenda, there is a logic to this. There is a progression to this. We're going to start with Indira, ask her to reflect on all that she has done and all that she is doing around UDI from a US perspective. So I will ask her some questions in a moment. Then we will move to Kevin, who has been on this journey with us for a very long time as well, and ask him to reflect again on what he has seen and what he's doing and what he sees as opportunities for improvement. And then we'll come to Dennis and Natalia and really look at not only what we have done, but how we can take that forward, both in the US and globally. So if you're not aware, there is a lot going on globally, a lot of other countries and regulators looking to implement UDI and to really leverage some of the opportunities that it provides. And so we all often get asked to reflect on that, to help others as they are going down this journey, so they don't have to, if you will, reinvent the wheel. So again, thank you all for joining us. As Mike mentioned, there will be a Q&A at the end. You can see there. So if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A chat, and we will endeavor to get to those at the end. And with that, we will jump to Indira. And with that, Indira, I'm going to ask you to both introduce yourself, and give us a little bit of background on your involvement with UDI, and to reflect, if you will, on the time that you have had on our wonderful journey together. Indira and I have been working on this together for a very long time. She has been really a key player in this. So I appreciate you joining us here today, and good afternoon, Indira.
Good afternoon, Jay. Thank you for having me. And my name, for those of you who don't know me, I currently am working as Deputy Director in the Division of Regulatory Programs, under which the UDI program resides. Personal reflections to begin with. I think I had no idea what I was getting into back in, I think I joined the UDI team back then in 2011, November 2011. So little did I know what, it was going to be. It started out as just another work project, but over the years, I have to say, especially lately, I have a deep sense of gratitude, honestly, to being part of such a fantastic program. It allows me, the amount of time I spend working on UDI has grown significantly over time and consumes so much of my thoughts now, even all the time. But I don't mind it at all, because I think the potential of this program is so enormous. So lots of gratitude to be part of this journey. So thanks to all the fantastic colleagues that are on the panel today. They all give me energy each time I come into any conversation or any setting where we gather together and then discuss the fantastic potential of UDI. So really, really grateful in many ways from a personal standpoint. Speaking more from a program standpoint, 10-year anniversary was Sunday, actually, Jay. I believe September 24th was Sunday.
Right.
The good news is that the infrastructure that the UDI rule needs, the UDI program needs, is in place. There is UDI on the label. There is data in Good ID. I believe we now have, I think I have a slide to show this, actually, if we can put the slide up. We have 4.13 million records in the Good ID database right now, and you see the progression. We've completed all the compliance state. So that's the great news. We are looking to leverage this now. The work that remains, honestly, is adoption and implementation throughout the healthcare ecosystem. We're doing a lot of exciting work within CDRH, which I know, Jay, we will talk about as we move forward in this conversation. So really excited about what we're beginning to do in FDA. We're seeing, I have slides for this too. 80% of MDRs, I believe now, are coming in with UDI information populated. So excited about what this means for us from a public health patient safety perspective, and the other, safety signals that UDI might help us unlock. And we're doing really some exciting work in this space. If you go to the next slide, we are also have taken on a very significant push to make sure UDIs get incorporated into recall submissions that come into FDA. And just from FY22 to where we are today, there has been significant progress. There is, of course, a lot of work still to be done in all these spaces, but it's nice to see the work coming full circle and us being able to use it. We also have UDIs being included in safety communications that FDA releases. We've had about 5 to 6 of them very recently come out where UDI has been included. Beyond FDA, we are really working to encourage broader adoption of UDI throughout the healthcare ecosystem, specifically the claims space, which I know Natalia and Kevin will talk about later in the program. So overall, a lot happening. There is a lot of momentum, so very excited. I would say that's the reflection aspect.
That was perfect. Thank you, Indira. And for those of you who don't know, Indira was our prime driver of Good ID. And so I often get a lot of compliments when I'm out traveling. People think Good ID works very well. And you can certainly thank Indira for the development and continued maintenance of that. So thank you, Indira, for all that you do, not only for UDI, but for bringing us what I think is a very good database. And for those of you who don't know, it was pretty novel at the time for FDA to put together such a database. We didn't have this kind of web portal kind of thing. And so it was a big push, but I think it's turned out really well. So I'm very excited. If you can go back a couple of slides, Mike, I think to Indira's first slide, I do want to say before we get to this, Indira, as you know, adverse event reporting and the potential for recalls was certainly some of the drivers from FDA's perspective for UDI. So there were a number of use cases and a lot of things that you can talk about and look at, but certainly that was what initially drove us, I would say, was really looking to be able to have better post-market surveillance information, and that journey continues. So with that, if we can go back to the next slide, sorry, Mike, we're jumping all around a little bit on you. So there's been continues to be some changes in Indira, some sort of wrapping up of a couple of different issues that were hanging out there, and maybe we can talk about that because I think they're both important. And the first one here is what we call the NICRIC codes, or National Health Related Item codes.
Yeah, sure. So use of legacy identifiers, NICRIC codes, as you mentioned, Jay. We had provided an enforcement discretion to continued use of them through September 24, 2023. So this just has expired. This essentially means that all finished devices manufactured and labeled on or after September 24th can no longer use the words NDC or NICRIC. And this was a challenging thing for us to get past. We did provide a couple of extensions on this enforcement discretion that was initially dated to end much earlier. But I think we've come full circle. Happy to see that we've wrapped this up and moving on. I believe the words NDC and NICRIC should no longer be on the packages starting September 24th, but anything prior to September 24th, if it was manufactured on label prior to September 24, 2023, it is still okay to continue distributing them with the way you had it before.
Right. This is for those of you who don't know, this is an issue primarily in the pharmacy space for those devices that are prescribed, dispensed, and reimbursed like drugs. There's this need to have basically a drug analogy for them. And so there's a lot. If you're in this space, it's a very important issue. And I know that there's been a lot of work, continues to be a lot of work in it. So appreciate that. The other one is, I think, a little more involved. I think if we go to the next slide, Mike. So this is really related to those class 2 primarily, or maybe exclusively, products that are distributed at retail.
Yep.
So do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Sure. So this one again were devices sold as Jay you mentioned, exclusively sold at retail establishments, and we allowed an alternative in this case to use UPC in lieu of the UDI. That was the alternative that was granted. As many of you may know, Class 1 devices may use UPC, but this alternative applies to, as Jay said, Class 2 devices. Even this one, we had provided an initial extension to expire sooner, but then we've extended it a couple of times. But now, again, even this is another one that we wrapped up this past Sunday, September 24, 2023. And just to note that device manufacturers may have both UPC and UDI on their labels. So your work can continue in terms of being able to get stuff scanned at the retail space, but the alternative where you were using UPC to meet your UDI requirement no longer exists. So you must have the UDI on the label of all of these devices. And the larger movement in this area seems to be to move away from UPC towards UDI, even in the retail space. So this, the alternative expiring aligns nicely with that. And as you know, Class 2 medical devices, the more detail we have in terms of production identifiers is always helpful for us. And as we mentioned before, we are utilizing UDI for safety signal detection and recalls. And that extra information that comes with UDI is definitely helpful.
Thank you. Yes, and for those of you who are in this retail space, there is a large effort, as Indira mentioned, going on in US and really globally around a migration to the ability to scan 2D barcodes at retail at point of sale. So there's a 2027 sunrise. And there's more information available on GS1's website if you're interested. But right, so now we have full information, production information about these Class 2 devices as well. And you could do it voluntarily for Class 1 too. So very good. Thank you, Indira. Next slide. We covered that. Okay. So let's talk about this. There are some manufacturers, I think, Indira, who maybe received the dreaded listing number email and caused people to be concerned about some of their data and the alignment of their data. So if you want to maybe touch on how and where Good ID is being connected to other pieces of information, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jay. I guess, as we mentioned, we've kind of turned the corner, the infrastructure in place. So what are we doing next as a regulatory agency? So we are focusing on compliance, and we want to make sure that the UDI rule requirements are implemented correctly. And towards that end, we're working internally to establish a robust infrastructure for UDI compliance. This means UDI is now going to be part of all routine inspections. So if you are a manufacturer and you have FDA inspectors coming, don't be surprised if they ask you about your UDI compliance, including Good ID data quality. We have, I believe, issued recently about 6 warning letters where UDI has been cited in addition to other quality system issues. We've also issued a couple of untitled letters where UDI has been cited. So definitely make sure, to expect UDI coming as part of routine inspections. We also have started and we completed a pilot for imports screening, where when a label screening takes place during an import entry review, UDI is being included. We did a pilot in the Southeast region, which we've completed, and we are now looking to evaluate how to roll it out nationwide. So if you are an importer listening, make sure you are compliant with UDI requirements. On top of that, the dreaded letter that Jay mentioned, is an attempt by us to determine and assess Good ID compliance. If there is an active listing in the registrational listing database, you are telling us essentially the FDA that you intend to commercially distribute that device. So if you intend to commercially distribute, we expect to see data in good ID. And that is how those letters came about. That was our initial foray into it. We've gotten a lot of lessons learned based on the dreaded response that we received. We are taking that into account and going to make some tweaks into our processes internally. So it may not be the last time you see such a letter from us. So it's essentially as making sure if you tell us that you have an active listing, we also expect to see a DI record associated with that active listing if UDI requirement apply for that device. So, call out to all of you, make sure your registration listing data is correct. What we learned is a lot of the times the listing information was incorrect. You listed a device that you are not commercially distributing. So make sure your listing data is correct, and then make sure your good ID entries match, and there is a good ID entry if it's an active listing. So that's important. In terms of this slide, the other key message we would like to pass on is, as manufacturers, as labelers, we are working in CDRH to make sure good ID is the source of device identification data. So if you get a pre-market approval for a device and you submit good ID data as your device identification data before you commercially distribute, after that, at any time you come to CDRH for any data submission requirement, be it recalls, be it MDRs, be it safety comms, annual reports, anything, we will be looking to see if your data aligns with the data you've submitted to good ID. And the expectation is that they must match, because you told us this is the product you got approval on, and this is the product you're distributing. Then anything you tell us about that product must match. And we understand there are large organizations that have silos, and one side doesn't know what the other side is doing. And we have that going on in CDRH as well. But this is a note to say, please take note of this and make sure you fix it, because this is about patient safety. This is important for us, and we are working to harmonize data for product data, device identification data, and good ID is going to be our key data source. So that's the key message. So please work to make sure, and we're not seeing this happening consistently now across. We are seeing data discrepancies. You tell us something in recalls, but the data in good ID doesn't match what you're telling us in recalls, and we want to minimize that. So you will see us working more on this and coming to you as we see data discrepancies, but we would appreciate, proactive response and proactive work from your side to address this.
I think it's a great point, Indira, and I think it's an issue, as you've said and you've described, for various FDA activities, FDA regulatory activities. It's certainly true outside of FDA. If you look at other activities, commercial activities, and I'm sure Kevin might touch on this when we chat here in a second. And globally, we're certainly seeing the same thing. So as we look at UDI implementation around the world and different regulators, they're certainly looking for consistency and for data to match, whether it's in these activities and import control activities that you also mentioned, across labeling, across IFUs, right? So there's really a need for us to sort of reflect on the creation and management of UDI data, and the fact that it really does need to align with other systems and processes, both within a manufacturer and external to that manufacturer. So it's a good call out, and I appreciate that, Indira. Anything else you'd like to say before I pivot over to Kevin?
I think we've hit on the key things I wanted to call out for, so I'm good for now. And
Okay,
thank you,
great.
Jay, for the convo.
Thank you, Indira. All right, Kevin, how are you?
Fantastic.
Good. Same initial question to you as to Indira. A little introduction and your role here in UDI, and maybe a little reflection on your journey that you have been on with us on for a very long time.
Yeah, thanks, Jade. Maybe the next slide can put a little bit of backdrop to my introduction, the one about Geisinger. Mike, if you could go one more. My role at Geisinger did not start out in the UDI standards world. It started out trying to teach lean from my experience running manufacturing operations. But fairly shortly thereafter, I found myself working with the supply chain team and then working directly under Deb Templeton, the current vice president at Geisinger Supply Chain. And she says, Kevin, you need to get involved with standards. And I said, what standards are we talking about, Deb? Because as a manufacturing operations person, I've used standards, I think, in every process I've ever built. And she said, well, believe it or not, in healthcare, we don't have data standards. So like the barcode that they use in retail. And, I'm sitting here and we were talking earlier, I'm thinking, my gosh, the barcode's turning 50, right? And I'm a little older than that, but, theoretically in 2009, which isn't that long ago, 14 years ago, when she said, get involved in data standards, right? It was surprising to me to find out that healthcare was not using the barcodes in really any really good way. They were on some packages, but it was a lot of hand entry and a lot of manual paperwork. And the fact that it's 14 years ago in 2009, when I have an organization that has just such a rich tradition of doing innovative work, that was shocking. I don't know how else to describe it. When you come from the manufacturing world into healthcare, you see all the amazing devices and drug advancements and device advancements, you just think it's futuristic. But when it came to process control, inventory control, recalls, electronic data entry into medical records, it was a manual sport. I'm happy to say after 14 years, it's less manual, Jay, but it has not been a downhill battle. It's been an uphill battle, as those on this call can speak to. And interestingly enough, my first entry into standards wasn't on UDI. It was the drug supply chain pedigree work, which I still carry on as well. I call it my two sides of the path, where I some meetings I'm talking drug supply chain security, and some meetings I'm talking UDI. But to me, it's all FDA related. And I've always said, to me, if you have the syringe and no drug, you have no care. If you have the drug and no syringe, you have no care, right? So from a supply chain perspective, you got to bring those two things together, and you got to administer it in a timely manner. It has to be the correct device and drug, and you got to make a perfect record of it. So if something goes wrong or needs to be investigated, you can do that with ease. So we're driving towards that, Jay, as you know, but we're not 100% there yet. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But just a little bit of background, if people aren't familiar with Geisinger, we're located in the heart of Pennsylvania. We cover a large, very rural geographic region. We've been innovating in the healthcare space since 1915, over 100 years of just really, really foundational roots out of Mayo. But our current mission is making better health easier. And we do that with what I call the three legs of the stool, right? We have our care providing locations. We have our hospitals. We have our clinic network. We call it the hub and spoke. We employ our physicians, right? We have 23,000 and growing members of our healthcare team that I get to be a part of. But we're unique because we also have a health plan. So we're a payer, right? So we understand the dynamics of being a payer. We understand, market shifts, right? The fastest growing segment of the population being the Medicare, Medicaid population. And then we have to support all the care providers in that work. And then Geisinger is a teaching hospital, right? So we do research and we're very innovative in our research. And I've had the privilege of working with some of our researchers. Natalia, Dr. Graham very well, who've been on a lot of the UDI work. So I think in making better health easier, though, I boil it down to this. I have to make it easier for the care provider to take care of the patient. And if I can bring standards to the point of care and reduce manual entry or reduce wondering if they have inventory or if it's expired or out of date or on a recall, I can make better health easier by an indirect association to that event. So that's a little bit of an intro on Geisinger and how I see my role as director of the process engineering team. that works to do some innovative process development and process control.
Thank you, Kevin. And so, you've been at the front line, or right behind the people at the front line.
Right.
And you continue to be, and we appreciate that. And as you said, you've been a strong vocal advocate since I first met you. I guess it was 2009. I don't know, or whenever it was a long time ago. So what's working? What do you think we've done well?
I think what we've done well is we came out with the law, and it seems surprising, right? That it was 10 years ago. We knew it was coming. But I think we brought uniqueness into a space where there was no uniqueness in identifying product. You can't deny the impact that is going to have long term. I'm not so sure that when we brought that uniqueness to the industry, when we were talking about single source of truth, that we've done as well in the single source of truth with that uniqueness. So we have the unique identifiers, right? We have the unique device identifier, but we have a lot of places we use that. And I think we have opportunity to make that even more seamless so that we can make our systems be a little bit more machine to machine compliant, Jay. There's a lot of work that comes in loading a device and loading the attributes around devices. But I think it's working, right? I think we're seeing it. Proud to say that in 2009, we had to make a decision about putting a point of care, point of capture system in place. It would have been much easier for my partners at the Owens and Minor QSite team to load their item master if we had solved all of the uniqueness and all of the single source of truth issues, right? So we didn't, but they were able to build a catalog around whatever device identification was currently on the package. And really what we're doing is we're lowering their burden. As we do more and more of that work, it's less work for them to maintain that catalog. And I don't have slides in this deck, but I'll put some links in the chat to some articles where Vicki Lyle, who usually speaks with me, when we go into detail on this. They're measuring, just like Indira had, how many devices they're seeing of the GS1, how many of the HIVIC, right, and how many of the other, which is usually typically either unidentified yet or, and that number, thank goodness, is very, very small, right? It's shrinking every day. And GS1 is growing and HIVIC is growing. So, I think because there's something on the packaging today, what falls into what is working in my mind since 2010, I've got people scanning inventory in to make sure nurses scan it out. And I feed that scanned information to multiple systems. I feed it to my purchasing system to reorder. I feed it to my EHR system to make an electronic health record. I feed it to the billing systems to help in billing. I use it for case analytics so I can see which providers are having strong performance and ask the tough questions. So I think you can't deny that that's working. That's a fantastic application of standards in healthcare. When I hear of providers that are still doing manual entry, I encourage them. There are a multitude of vendors out there that do point of use, point of capture solutioning. I'm not here to say you have to use any one of them. You can pick, but I can't imagine doing this today without having some type of a solution that helps a nurse at the front line not do manual data entry. We should be well beyond that, but I know it's still going on out there. So if anybody needs more information on that, please reach out to me. We'll help you discover people that can help you get what I would consider at least current with point of use, point of capture.
So, Kevin, you and I have talked about this many times, and I've heard you say that, and you make it sound so simple. I go to the grocery store and I pick up my box of Cheerios, and I go to the self-scan and it works, and I pay and I leave. And I know it's not that easy, and I know that you've had to do and continue to do a lot of work to make this work. To your point, to make it easy for your frontline staff to scan. So I want you talk about that, because I don't want people to come away thinking we're done. Oh, it's, if I just go buy the system, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jay. What we do as a supply chain team, that next step back, right, where we're assisting that provider, the first thing we go in and scan one of every item that we find if there's a scannable barcode. If we don't have a scannable barcode, we take a picture of it, right? So that we at least have a copy of the label in front of us, because what we're going to do is we're going to build out that item master, right? We're going to make sure that we know the products that we're working with, because the next step is to go in before I go live, after we train everybody how to use the point of use system, how to, scan it out when it's time to do it on a case. But we have to go in and do a physical inventory, because when we're building the item master, you're just loading the items. When you're doing the physical inventory, you're loading that you've got 10 of an item, and you're scanning every unique lot or serial number of that item, because you're getting very granular in the detail about that product. So once that's done, the supply chain team typically takes on the responsibility to always make sure the item is scanned in, and the nursing or the clinical team is only responsible for the scan out. So occasionally, to make it easier for them, we may get a damaged barcode label. We might get a label that doesn't have a scannable barcode. And our point of use, point of capture system allows us to generate a unique identifier that we can then enroll. What we call enroll, we'll manually type in the part number, we supply chain, so that the clinical person only is still in that single scan environment that we promised them. So our next chapter with Owens & Minor and QSight is to start to measure that and actually give feedback to our industry peers, so that they know, what percentage of their product is a easy scan in, scan out, and if there's any percentage of product that we're having to what we call augment. But that's something we're going to probably always be working on until we fully get, the UDI adopted on all products, all packages, and all levels of use. And somebody brought that up, right? Because we might have had a label when we took the outer pack off, and we don't necessarily have that same identification on the inner pack, right? So that's something we have to continue to monitor and work on as well. And that's a deep ocean, Jay. I don't know how deep you want me to go on that, but we can compartmentalize that into a couple of different areas.
Right. I think well, you touched on a number of things. At the end, you touched on the whole unit of use issue, which I think is something that we continue both in the drug and the device space to struggle with, and to make sure that there is identification at that level, whatever that level is, and it varies so much for particularly for devices, that it's something that your data, I think, and your continued focus on it is important, and I think we'll continue to evolve that conversation as we all learn more about where we need to have an identifier, where we need to have that barcode so we can do that scan, right? And it varies so much. So appreciate that very much. So a couple of questions, maybe looking forward, unless you want to say anything else about the past.
No, I think I'll leave that, because it might come up in some of the other Q&A later on.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So you've been doing this now, as you say, and Deb obviously had the foresight to not only bring you on, but to give you this, and you've been running with it ever since, and it's been great. And all of us on the phone appreciate very much, and on the call, and all the folks that we've worked with appreciate your input. How do we get others engaged? Other people like you, other health systems? Clearly, Geisinger sees itself on the cutting edge, and so you, I think, see this as part of that conversation. How do we engage others in this conversation?
Yeah, I've thought about that, because it's an interesting question, right? After 14 years, it's like, why do I still feel kind of lonely in the provider space, whether I'm talking on the drug side or the device side? And I think it comes down to when I just listened to the virtual GS1 Global conversations last week, right? And I think about what somebody said about 2027, they're going to replace, the long-standing linear barcode UPC, right? that kicked off the, the scanning revolution, 50 years ago. But that industry is customer experience driven. And our industry, unfortunately, is regulation driven, right? Which Indira and I have talked, so I don't think I'm saying anything out of school, but I think we want to get to the point where that customer experience is the driver, right? And we start to celebrate some of the things we're doing, not only with data and data capture, but some of those things that we can start to talk about, just like our retail and our food partners are talking about, how quickly that they're tracing things down. If they can get a customer to share their, their purchasing card when they scan out at receipt with that new digital link in the barcode, they're going to be able to do recalls faster than we're going to be able to do recalls, and that's not right. Right, I'm going to work very hard in Indira to make sure that, what we have in place today, we can get caught up. But we've got a lot of participation that needs to occur. We need to get the EHRs, we need to get the claims forms, right? We need to get that association with the patient so that we can compete with our industry peers, because they're customer experience driven, right? That's their driver. We've got to get out of this mindset that says if the FDA doesn't say we have to do it, it's optional. I just want to change that. I want to make sure that that's kind of the credo that we start to say, we're listening to the patients, we're listening to their needs. And, I've heard Beth Wells tell the story from GS1 about you can get a recall on a secondhand car. And I stopped and thought about that and went, that's impressive, right? Because firsthand car, I bought the car. I registered the VIN number to my name, right? But you buy a secondhand car, you move the VIN number over to the second person in the cell, and you can still get the recall notice on that vehicle. We've got to get there, right? I think our patients deserve it. We've got to get there.
Well, I would say that most patients think we're already there, which is maybe even more problematic. I know that all of us probably on this webinar have had the conversation with someone who thinks that UDI has been in place forever, right? Of course it is, and if you try to explain to them that do you know what hip implant you have? No, but nope, someone does. Well, no, they may not. So, that's very true. Very true. So you've sort of outlined, I think, where we need to go when I don't know, if we do this call again in 10 years, assuming we're all still at it. Will we be having the same conversation, or will all of the issues that you raised be solved, and we will be celebrating the glory that is UDI implementation?
Yeah, I think we're going to overcome the inertia. I don't want to downplay the amount of work that our manufacturing partners have had to do, our solution providers have had to do. I remember when this started, I didn't even have a place to put the UDI, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into this. And I think when we get those pathways connected, we will start to see in 10 years, some of the things that we sit around the table and talk about, where we're using the data to help drive the innovation. I really believe, though, the one massive thing healthcare is not benefiting from, that we'll turn the page on someday and hopefully shortly, is this gives us the ability to distribute the work and manage it in a way that all people that are participating can benefit. I just think that the collegiality that is just the fundamental driver of how our clinicians get their training, it stops after medical school. And that collegiality could continue in developing the best way to do hip implants, the best way to do a heart valve, the best way to do a heart catheterization, right? Not everybody working on it. It doesn't have to be that way. We didn't survive in manufacturing by trying to do it that way, and I don't think healthcare is going to survive either. So I think there's a key that we're going to find very shortly that's going to unlock that door. And we're going to be able to distribute some of these futuristic things we've talked about, Jay. and then share it, right?
Right.
Because ideally, that's the goal, right? To share that knowledge and then build on it, because that's what data standards allow us to do. It's a foundational tool in and of itself. Other than that, it doesn't do a whole lot. But if we take advantage of it, we can do things a lot faster and with a lot less equity investment.
A lot smarter, right?
Yeah.
There's right, really, and that's, I think, what continues to drive us is that there's so much opportunity, so much insight that can be gained once we put all of this infrastructure in place. There's so much more that we can do. So appreciate that, Kevin. Any parting thoughts before I pivot over to Dennis and Natalia?
No, I think we'll keep some in reserve for the Q&A. We'll see what comes up.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kevin. Again, very much appreciate all the time and effort that you have put into this and continue to put into this. Kevin and I have all sorts of very interesting conversations, and it's always insightful to understand what's really going on in a healthcare organization. And I don't want to give you more work than you already have, Kevin, but you've always been gracious with sharing, not only with us, but with almost anyone who calls. So really do appreciate it.
Appreciate it. And I'm glad I work for an organization that allows me this privilege, right? And it truly is a privilege to do this work.
It's UDI. It's the greatest calling.
Yeah.
So with that, let's head over. Mike, I don't know what the slides look like, but let's head over to Dennis and Natalia. Welcome both of you. Thank you very much for being here. Also, folks who have been involved with this for a long time. Natalia, we'll start with you. Same sort of opening question, a little introduction, your journey and on UDI and sort of whatever reflections you might want to share.
Okay, thanks, Jay. As mentioned, my name is Natalia Wilson. I'm at Arizona State University, where I'm currently Executive Director in the Center for Healthcare Delivery and Policy. I also have adjunct faculty positions in College of Health Solutions and also at Mayo Clinic, Mayo Medical School in Scottsdale. So whereas I've worn a few different hats at ASU, a consistency really from early on has been my work on UDI. I mean, I caught the bug, I don't know when, can't remember now, and no, everybody on this panel have known them for quite some time. My area of focus has always been that clinical realm, that clinical importance and research on UDI implementation in health systems. So really how we can best support patients, patient care, clinicians, researchers, so, surrounding the use of medical devices. So as I reflect back on the UDI rule at 10 years, I mean, I wasn't directly involved in its development, but I've been very supportive from the beginning in what I call my lane, which is the writing, research, publication space. And interestingly, 10 years ago, right before the rule came out, I had a viewpoint on UDI. And then just last month, we had a viewpoint also at 10 years. So these kind of two bookends, hope they're not my last, on UDI. But so just a few reflections. First of all, in my mind, the rule was a significant accomplishment by the US FDA. I mean, it was detailed, it put forth very important public health objectives and purpose. And it really introduced for the first time in the US the regulatory requirement for a standard for medical devices and the means to establish a system so we could track medical devices to their distribution and use, and then of course the data after use. And I also think it not only set a standard for the US, but then set a standard for other countries that were not yet on the UDI path or journey. Of course, what FDA faced, and I'm sure Jay is going to be nodding, is that early or first adopter issue, right? You come out first, and then all these things that you had with good intentions didn't necessarily happen as such. So that's one quick reflection. The other, and it taps into what I've heard earlier from Indira and also Kevin, is really over the past 10 years, and this really started before the rule came out, a very accomplished group of UDI experts have been and have stayed involved. I mean, there's just such trust that's developed. We've all worked together. These are folks that have been so committed, so patient, who have addressed problems, developed solutions, done research, and there's all created all sorts of tools and roadmaps and guidance documents and all of that. And I don't think we can or should underestimate the value of that. That is really powerful. And I hope that's something that we all carry forth. And just like Indira, whenever I interact with all of you, I come away energized. I always learn something. I always think about what I want to do next with UDI. And then just quickly, the last that's not quite as rosy. Frankly, for a standard in a system that's grounded in patient safety, I have been surprised is not strong enough a word. Shocked, I guess, how long this has taken and continues to take, and the political aspect of some of the issues that we need to move forward from various stakeholders and their advocacy organizations, and how complex it's been. And really that one agency organization has not become the leader in driving the whole comprehensive system. So those are just a few thoughts as I reflect back.
I appreciate that. I appreciate both your recognition of the amount of work that has gone into this, a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I do appreciate that. And it's true. I mean, you've worked and continue to work with lots of people who continue to try to drive this adoption. But I too am surprised, shocked, dismayed that we aren't further along. And it, I just remember the early days and the conversations, and we need this and hurry up and get this done. And took FDA, not FDA. It took the federal government a while to finally get the rule out. And we're sort of trickling along here, and I'm waiting for the floodgates to open at some point. But I do appreciate that, Natalia. Dennis has been on this journey with me for a very long time. Becton Dickinson, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to get in front of UDI and have been very involved and very vocal. We spent a lot of time when I was at FDA visiting various BD facilities to understand it all. So Dennis, a little introduction and your journey and reflection, if you will.
Yes, my name is Dennis Black. I currently work as UDI Program Director for BD. I work within our central regulatory group, and I'm focused on UDI, not just in the US, but globally. And depending on your company and what you're focused on, I mean, you may or may not know that there are UDI regulations in Turkey and China and Taiwan and the European Union and South Korea and Saudi Arabia and Singapore. And along with implementing in the US, we're implementing in all those other countries as well. Excuse me. And then also we look at, Japan and Brazil and Australia, right? Regulations that we're also focused on, and the list will continue to grow. So that has been my focus for the last 10 years. And if I think of the biggest surprise, I was either naive or optimistic, but I really thought we would be farther along than we are right now. I really did. And I think we look at this from a device manufacturer perspective. We've done a tremendous amount, right? I mean, a decade ago, right, 10 years ago, we were still trying to understand what's the difference between an issuing agency, how does all that work, and trying to have clarity on how to enumerate our devices and making sure that we understood our issuing agency specifications on barcodes and going through those data attributes just over and over again, and QMS considerations, and then the idea that we had to somehow change our complaint handling system. But all those things have been done, right? I mean, we've done those things. And I think what's really more difficult than I had expected is to get perfection in all these areas. It's reasonably easy to be right much of the time, but I know that's not what FDA expects, and that's not what healthcare providers are looking for either. We're looking for perfection. And it really is difficult when you look at large product lines to go through and make sure that you have accurate data in every single instance and that your GTINs are perfectly assigned. Oh, sorry, I guess I'm supposed to say your UDI DIs are perfectly assigned, and to make sure that you have this accurate and you're maintaining it, right? So it is a tremendous amount of work. And we have variation in different countries, right? The UDI regulations are similar, but they're not identical. So when a new country comes up with the UDI regulation, you got to make sure that if they've got differences in their barcode requirements, that you go through and do a gap assessment and check that against what you've done previously, because they have something new and you may or may not have that within your current system. And then you look at data attributes. Yes, of course, we need to keep up to date with where we are with the GUDID, but each country has come up with new data attributes. And if you study those data attributes, there is less overlap from country to country than what you'd expect. When you look at the attributes that are used globally, it's really only a handful. And I think that is what makes it really difficult when we think about implementing UDI. We have really countries around the world, all with the same goal, but doing things in a slightly different way. And I think that just complicates what we're doing. But I mean, we've come a long way in 10 years, but I don't think that we're close to being finished.
I appreciate that, Dennis. And it's, it's interesting in reflecting on something Kevin said before. We want to learn, right? We want to use this to be better at what we are doing. And it's not just obviously the US, but globally that people want to do that. At the same time, we also need to be cognizant that we can learn not just from each other, say in one country or one regulatory domain, but we can learn from others in other countries and other domains. So keeping that sort of global focus is important, but we'll come back to that, Dennis. Natalia, you talked about being a bit shocked that we're not further along. Maybe I think shocked was the word you used. So what are the hurdles? What's limiting really healthcare organizations from really being where you think they should be?
Well, first of all, I mean, you asked about healthcare organizations. I definitely focus on, health systems, but also those researchers that are now engaged in real world evidence studies on medical devices and want to kind of get going in this space. It's just such a really early space. And I've always viewed UDI adoption in health systems as a continuum, right? So there's this sort of want to get started, but cannot for various hurdles, barriers, limited implementation, and maybe an area, maybe in supply chain or one clinical area, and then what I'd call end-to-end implementation, where there's continued advancement to other areas. So I definitely put Geisinger in this end-to-end implementations, continuing to implement in more and more areas. So I think the hurdles really differ between those scenarios. And so let me just touch on some of those key areas. I mean, certainly, because there's a lack of policy to require, and we got back to, what Kevin said, we're in this regulation, so we have to do it headset rather than do it because it's the best thing to do. But that's where we are. So there's a lack of policy to require UDI implementation and use in the clinical realm. And so right off the bat, this can preclude leadership buy-in and organizational support. So folks may fall into the want to get started, but they can't. Some health systems, Geisinger have been being an example, there's others, Mercy, Duke, Mayo, others, have internally projected return on investment and benefits and have moved ahead without a requirement. So we're getting into that better state that Kevin was talking about, some quite significantly, but others certainly have not. So when I think about the policy hurdle, in my mind, it really comes down to that reimbursement or payment space where you basically have that lever on health systems or accreditation. And both of those are just not in place in the US. I mean, end of story. And I mean, earlier on, someone mentioned the whole UDI, DI, and claims, which was going through this whole journey of bureaucratic evaluation and passing it to the next. And all of a sudden it hit one of the committees and they kind of shut down the whole thing, not specific to UDI, DI in claims, but to the whole update of the claims form. So it's things like that, getting back to my shocked, surprised, want to have a temper tantrum sometimes, like another barrier that we all have become very resilient to think through what are we going to do next with this hurdle and barrier. Haven't quite figured this out. We sent letters about that, but that still works. So that's one of the key hurdles, definitely I'd bring up. The other or another is really a lack of support to build what I call the requisite infrastructure. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. I mean, Kevin touched on this, but not a lot of detail. You got to look in the health system, you got to look at data flow. You've got to look at clinical workflow and non-clinical workflow. The IT infrastructure, what systems do you have? Which ones can play well together, which is improving. And what do you need to update or change and redesign, whatever. There has to be dedicated HR, leadership, champions. It requires time, it requires funds. So that's another area that definitely becomes a hurdle. And places like Geisinger and Duke have really said, we're going to do this. This is important for our mission and taking care of patients, but others have not necessarily done that. I think another hurdle, and I just finished a research project, and so we had a few recommendations coming out of it. There's this lack of awareness broadly of UDI and its benefits, right? All of us know what it is. But even within a system that has implemented UDI, you talk to some folks, they don't quite get it. They don't quite know how you access UDI. So there's really not this broad understanding. It's very underdeveloped. That needs to be common knowledge, and it just is not. And that's actually an area that I'm really thinking through right now. Is there a platform we can use to tap into the mentors, people who've done this, who are really good in the different areas that need to come together and start to teach other people, but something that can be accessed on a bigger way? So Indira, you and I might be talking about that. And just lastly, another hurdle is the IT infrastructure. I mean, the capability of IT systems has certainly evolved over time. And I'm always reminded, be careful what I say in my publications because things are better. Yes, in the health systems I study, a lot of them are using one of 3 ERP systems, one of 2 HR systems, mainly one. But when you come to point of care scanning, huge diversity, so many different systems. There's not an out of the box solution for this. So the IT infrastructure is going to really heavy lift for health systems. So those are some of the top hurdles. Obviously, we could get into a whole bunch of them, but those are kind of the top areas that I think about.
Yeah, I it's interesting to the policy conversation. Again, it's for me on the face of it, it makes sense. Why don't we just do it? But we all continue to run into these policy hurdles that we just, for whatever reason, and not that we haven't all been working on them for a very long time, we just can't seem to really get over them. And so we have this lack of real mandate that's there for those folks that want to implement. So the IT infrastructure one is interesting because I think it's also true, Dennis, on the device manufacturer side. Certainly there's a requirement, and to your previous points, manufacturers are being compliant or trying to be compliant, and certainly they make sure whatever needs to be done is done. But certainly I see a lack of integration from a device manufacturer's perspective, inability to really share this data, sort of some of the things I think Natalia was getting at in terms of being able to move the information through the organization so that it can be ultimately useful to the end user. What do you see as hurdles for device manufacturers? I mean, you are on the literal front line of manufacturer implementation. BD is committed to doing it, and obviously, much like Kevin's point that he is working on it, they have you working on it, but that's certainly not true across the board. And so, what do you see as hurdles either for your organization or for other organizations, and in really adopting this within their organization and leveraging it for their own good, not just meeting the regulatory mandate?
Well, sticking with the theme of IT challenges, right? If we knew 10 years ago that we were going to have all these other countries coming up with UDI regulations and understood it better, we would have done things very, very differently, right? When we implemented our our data structure for GUDID, we were thinking of US FDA, right? This is what we need to do to comply with US FDA. And I think we came up with a pretty good process of how to manage our data, where to store this, but we were looking only for US FDA. And as we've looked at, this parade of countries coming out with UDI regulations, there is no way we can keep doing what we're doing and succeed, right? So we've had to kind of change directions and look at centralized data. And I think that that's been a big complication. If we look at just ERP challenges in general, and it depends on what you have for your source of truth for your UDI, DI assignments and how you go through and just some of the configuration that you do, right? I mean, this was unknown to us 10 years ago, exactly where we'd end up. So I think we've made do with it, but it's been a whole lot of work and it's been challenging to get there. I think there are other system challenges when we think of just labeling and what you would store for labeling attributes. And again, that's something that we're revising things as we go, but we sure would have done it differently if we had known what was going to come up and what else we'd need to do along the way.
So aside from IT, do you feel that there are any other hurdles that you see within your organization, or that you see in other manufacturing organizations that at all inhibit? I mean, what I've been surprised by, I guess, Dennis, and maybe you see things, I've seen things, different things. Even though, yes, we have met and are meeting regulations, I don't really see it being endemic, right? UDI isn't used throughout the device manufacturer's organization. They're still using catalog numbers or SKU numbers. You don't really see it as part of sort of to Natalia's point, it's not part of the organization, it's not part of the language or what people understand or how they think about devices.
Well, for our organization, we do scan, and even before there was a UDI regulation, we were using GS1 standards and we used it for supply chain purposes. And we were already pretty good at this before the UDI regulations came about. And that's why we were taking an interest in it during the development phase. Our real fear was that you and others at FDA would come up with another competing system and we'd have to think in terms of two sets of barcodes, right? I mean, that was a real fear that we had. And we would have to think of one barcode for FDA and another barcode for commercial purposes. And I think it made a whole lot of sense. And I think that the strategy that you put in place and the way you went after this, I think it's worked well because we've continued to leverage the barcodes on our shipping cases and kind of double down then on quality, right? The importance of it. Yes, we need this to run our supply chain, but we also need this for the regulator. So I think it's helped us in that sense. But I think I underestimated the amount of training and the amount of resources that would be required to systematically maintain UDI. And whether that's labeling, whether that's data, yes, we understood it when we had to gather all this data once, but you look at putting process in place so you can move from one person that understands it and kind of get it to where others in the organization can continue on. It is really, really, really difficult. And for us, we do manufacturing around the world. So we have to make sure that it's not just our US factories, of course, if we're making products in wherever, Mexico, China, Europe, and shipping it to the US, yes, we need to comply in the same way. So just to have that kind of reach in a global organization, it takes a lot of planning. And then I think what really confuses things is when you think about a factory that's going to be making products for 10 countries with UDI regulations, and there is some variation, it's tricky and requires a lot of planning to make sure that, yes, they're following those requirements for the given country that they're shipping to. And it takes a lot of planning. I mean, it's working fine, but we would do better if we were globally harmonized.
Right. Understood. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's in the same way that Natalia and Kevin talked about this being really integrated into healthcare. I'm hoping that we see the same for device manufacturers and others who are involved. I mean, we're sort of talking about two ends, bookends here, but certainly there's a lot of other players. Natalia touched on some of the policy issues with respect to payment and some other issues. So there's certainly other stakeholders who are involved. But to that end, Natalia,
could I just add one more thing, just to kind of get back as we wrap up hurdles? What we heard starting with Indira and from you is, I mean, there's lots of uses of UDI, which is what we want to achieve, obviously. But if we don't have it implemented in health systems, we just don't have a robust level of that. And I just want to share that, we looked at my last research project at researchers who are very committed to post-market safety surveillance, studying medical devices. They're engaged with NSCC. And some of them had UDI in their system, but less than 50% did not, which is kind of shocking also. But the ones that did, I mean, they knew exactly what the device was. They could move away from this manual chart review, natural language processing. These studies were scalable. It took less time, there was less expense. And I mean, where we want to get is then having collaborative efforts and data sets that we can link via the UDI. So it just opens up this whole world, and we're seeing it, but we sort of have this elephant in the room of let's get going on implementing it so that we have that data and we can use it.
Novel concept that if you actually implement it, it works, right? I mean, that's sort of what's the point? I mean, to some extent, as much as I'd like to think that we were brilliant, a lot of what we're talking about exists in the pharmaceutical space. You have ubiquitous use of NDC numbers throughout, right? A lot of the policy issues and other things you've touched on, Natalia, don't exist for, or they've been resolved for pharmaceutical products. And therefore we have really all of this robust data that exists in that space because those problems have been overcome. And so we just sort of looked at that and said, yeah, we want to do that in the device space. And that's really what started this process. So appreciate that. In sort of in keeping with the theme of this last panel here, what would you recommend, Natalia, to others? I know that you and I have been on a couple of calls where we have done this. What would you recommend to other regulators, other countries? Obviously, we know what you would say to the US policymakers, but what would you say to others who are thinking about or starting this journey? What should they consider in adoption and implementation? Maybe some of the things that we missed in the US.
Well, I think one of the things that's really important, and it would have been preferable in the planning stage, actually, the US FDA regulation, and maybe it was, or I'm just naive because I'm not in the policy space, but you need partnerships. So it would have been preferable to think about the endpoint, which is this comprehensive system and all the pieces we need, because obviously the UDI rule addressed labeling and data in the good ID, but that's not the end of it. And then FDA doesn't have purview over the main place that needs to use it. So I think really important is to kind of visualize that and think up front and start those partnerships and consider what are some of the barriers you might run into. I mean, IT ended up being a big one, and what may be some additional policy that may be needed. And we've been talking about a lever on healthcare delivery. So I think that that's really important. And I think that these partnerships are in silos. Like we're kind of talking about a macro level. So we got whoever's going to handle labeling, use, and then use of UDI after. We got to figure out all that. But then there's this sort of what I call meso level, which is within an organization. And for health systems, there's a whole bunch of people in there. And you've got to understand these are not people that traditionally work together all the time. So really think through how you're going to collaborate together. And so it really starts with awareness of the silos, I guess is my point. You have to visualize that endpoint and understand that and learn from where we may have fallen down, but we're still getting up. But also there needs to be education. There just absolutely needs to be education, and patients need to know what's going on here. I did focus groups of patients in a research study, and just tapping into something you said earlier, I mean, patients just assumed, oh, it's somewhere. You're like, well, maybe not, you
Right.
know, and then 2 of them had UDIs on their implant cards and didn't even know it till the focus group. So the whole point is there just needs to be this broad education of stakeholders. And of course, to reiterate policy, you have to have policy in the right places. It has to be done well, whether it's, you know, an incentive, then a penalty, how they did EHR,
Right.
I don't know. And then you just have to also with IT have greater transparency and ease of understanding of what the capabilities are, what versions you need, what are the best combinations, all of that. So I think the IT space needs to be visualized also.
Well, and interesting IT at the same time that we're having all of these conversations about digital health, right? So there's just, I think we're where we started, you know, again, software is a medical device, sort of these digital tools were just starting. And now it's expanding at the same time, right? The sort of the device space in general. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to allow those connections to occur, and so much that we can do with digital health that we're just, I think, really starting to scratch the surface on. So, but okay, I agree, and thank you for that. Dennis, same question to you. What would you suggest to others? I know that you and I spend a lot of time in our conversations on Europe in particular, but with other countries and other regulators. What else besides what Natalia has described, sort of keeping the end in mind, which is we certainly could have done a better job of. What else would you suggest to regulators and others, policymakers, to consider in UDI implementation?
Well, I think for other regulators, I think a key point is for them to invest more time learning before they come up with their own UDI regulation. And I think there are both good examples and bad examples out there today. And I think we could look at a couple of the regulators out there that have really been great students and have gone through and they've looked and they've examined the other UDI regulations. They've looked to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. And they're going as far even to, you know, to visit hospitals to determine what would work if you were to take and overlay these rules. So I do think that some of the regulators out there have done very good work as far as just thinking this through. Also with data, rather than just coming up with just new lists of data attributes, I really think it makes sense for them to study what has already been done. And I think a very good example of that recently, I think TGA in Australia, I give them high marks, where they went and they looked at every regulation out there. They studied the databases. They asked their healthcare providers within the country. They asked device manufacturers. And at the end of it, what they ended up doing, and it's not final yet, but it looks like they're going to use at least most of what US FDA has come up with already. They were pleased with the data definitions. They understood the structure. And that's what it looks like they're going to do, is they're going to have at least most of the data attributes that you have in GUDID. And there's a couple of things that, of course, are just different in their market. So yes, they will have a need for some additional data attributes, but I think it's important for them to look at it and determine really what else has been done already, what works, and what's going to satisfy their healthcare providers.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I think it's critical that we all learn. I forget who said it. One of us did, but you know, we were the first. The US was the first out of the gate. Clearly, I would have done some things very, very differently today. There's a lot that we've learned, a lot that we continue to learn, and hopefully those other regulators will take those lessons to heart, I guess, Dennis, and really try to understand that.
What would you do differently, Jay? What would you do differently, or do you want us to answer that first question? What we should have done 10 years ago?
I actually would like Indira and Kevin to join us, and I'd like to ask that question of everyone, and then I will answer it myself as well. Dennis, so since you brought it up, what would you do differently?
I think in retrospect, I think having better clarity on some of the data definitions would have helped us, and we would have gotten there quicker. And the three that come to mind are model inversion, catalog number and model, whatever it is. We have two different attributes that we answer virtually the same way. And for us, we think of a model as something, if we have capital equipment, we would think of that as being a model that has versions associated with it. And then we think of a catalog number as usually a disposable product. But I think having additional clarity on what was expected, I think on brand name, limiting it to the brand name, and what we now realize as we're looking to populate databases globally, it doesn't make sense to have a brand name and along with a company name and a product description. It just doesn't work when you translate it into different languages. If you stick to just a simple brand name, then it works because you've already done that work to make sure the brand name works in all these countries. And if you want to have an attribute that's useful globally, it just makes all the sense in the world to stick with the brand name and keep it simple, and then it's good universally. I think product descriptions, I mean, where we've arrived is it should be the product description that's on the primary package, right? That is what the clinician's going to see, but that's not necessarily the way it was populated in the beginning. I know that companies used ERP descriptions and used all kinds of different things, but if we look at what is most useful for Natalia or for Kevin, if we have a product description that matches the product label, I think that makes sense. I think that I know one of the pet peeves I hear from hospital systems over and over is if the UDI, DI, and the catalog number aren't changing at the same time. And I think that's something that could have been clearer in the beginning. And I know ISO has since come up with a requirement, so maybe it's been solved right there. I think that would have been helpful. And then if I think of some of the devices out there that are a little bit trickier, having more clarity on what's expected for in vitro diagnostics. I know there are still some lingering questions as to what is the best way to account for in vitro diagnostics. And then, of course, with surgical trays, we end up with questions that are still floating around the market, and then even configurable devices. So, I mean, I think overall, in retrospect, I think the rule was really pretty good, particularly for going first. But I think we would have helped ourselves if we had better data definitions in the beginning, so we could have moved faster on data quality.
I agree, Dennis. Thank you for that. Natalia, I mean, aside from maybe giving FDA some different authority or an additional authority or making them the policymaker, what could we have done differently?
I think from my perspective, and I don't have as much granular detail of issues like Dennis, but I think it really gets back to a point I brought up earlier. I just feel like the end goal and the partnerships and thinking through, hindsight is wonderful. We all know that. So we're sitting here going, oh, you should have, could have done whatever.
Right.
But to me, that could have started the conversation earlier. I feel like we're constantly digging out and hitting these issues and then having to regroup and figure out how are we going to address them, rather than maybe upfront them being thought about. This might be an issue. This is kind of where we are, because in order to go from here to there, this needs to happen. So I'm a big believer, in partnerships across silos, and I think it really pertains with UDI also.
Well, you certainly are doing a lot of that today, and I thank you. And for those who haven't seen some of Natalia's work out there, I hopefully we can have a list of links here. There's some very good work, very interesting. The playbook is fantastic, so I appreciate all of your partnerships and continued work on that. So thank you. Part of it, it's interesting. Part of it was, I don't know that we had the visibility, right? We couldn't see. Right, we sort of were stymied in how far we could look. So I don't know. That's it. I wish we had better visibility then. Kevin, what would you? I mean, you were pretty vocal all those years, and we listened. What would you say differently in all of those vocalizations?
Well, I think I'll echo some of the other comments that were made. Right, I am surprised that we are 14 years into this and we are just starting to see some fruits of our labor. Because I think the opportunities to do things that are going to be required of healthcare at a different level than our retail, our food service, our hardline partners, right? I mean, they're going to do amazing things. They're going to scan a digital link and a barcode, and they're going to find out that there's interactions with food or allergies. They're going to have recipes that come up. They're going to say this product works well with this product, so buy this one too. Like, those are just that whole customer centric thing. So my core success has always been, I start with the end in mind. Whether I was running a manufacturing plant, right, or whatever the product or service I was trying to design, like, what's the customer do with this? And is there anything I can do to make that experience for the customer better? And I just think because we try to implement standards after there was already devices at the point of use already sitting on the shelf, that you're trying to implement something after you've already got things in flow. So I think what we really need to focus on is new product introduction, Jay, and speed to market, right? Speed to get it into your database, speed to transact on it, and show that the new world works while we try to figure out how to unwire and rewire the old world. We have that challenge in healthcare, right? And not only do we have that challenge, but we had to make decisions early on that said, you know what, you can't reuse a UDI, or you can't reuse a DI, right? Because these devices could be in a medical record, they could be in research for many, many years, right? So our world isn't going to be, we can borrow from retail and food and those organizations when they're doing neat things with recalls and things like that. But when it comes to an EHR, they really don't have a long history they have to maintain, right? We have to maintain that history. So I think once we get going, once we get the flywheel going, we're going to outpace them. There's another thing that wasn't mentioned and bubbled up in my mind, like on the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. There's a counterfeiting, right? Proliferation, and the whole DSCSA is trying pedigree, right? How do we get a pedigree? How do you know that this is a true device that came, or drug that came from the manufacturer? I know there's a little bit of that counterfeiting and pedigree issue in the device side. But I think the pioneering that's going to go on in DSCSA is going to help us on the medical device side. And some of us banded together and said, you know what, let's try to change the stick to a carrot. If we're going to have all this pedigree information on a drug, let's do targeted recalls. Don't tell me to look on my shelf and see if I have this drug if you know it never came to me, right? That single event alone, if you know this industry, you can process it in your mind and go, wow, that could have an extremely large impact on saving healthcare organizations a lot of time and energy. So I think there's things coming down the road, right, to tell me we can't give up. We've got to maintain our foothold on standards. Yes, it got a little complicated when we had multiple issuing agencies, but we're figuring that out, right? That was a little bit of a sideways step, but we're figuring it out. There's things happening in the, in the surgical trays that I think are going to come out shortly. They're going to make things that seemed impossible a few years ago possible. So that's exciting. You just can't stop, right? We're in this. We got to keep persevering. But my credo has always been, let's start with the end in mind and work backwards. And I know it didn't necessarily come that way, right? But because of organizations like BD that have been on this journey, and others that I've worked with, we're starting to have that end-to-end conversation that Natalia is talking about. And I think that's what Indira wants to know, right? She wants to know that her standards are helping us. She doesn't want to feel it's a burden, right? We don't want to have this stick behavior. We want to get to that point where we're actually benefiting an industry, we're benefiting healthcare, we're benefiting the providers that consume the products and help the patients. And here's the scariest thing, guys. Geisinger is trying to work on making better health easier, right? That means it's got to start well before the brick and mortar. So I've said to my supply chain teams at Geisinger, you know what? I have trouble moving things through the captive brick and mortar, and I'm going to have to take this work external to the brick and mortar, to the patient home, right? Thank goodness a smartphone was developed. Thank goodness it has a camera on it. Thank goodness it can recognize a barcode label. But what it can't do is it can't tell me that a device has been in the trunk of a car, right? And I don't want to use that device because it's been temperature exposed. So I have to integrate other technology that's available, right? But it's not present yet. if I want to do this out in that network as well. But you can think about it. You can start to put the pieces together in today's world, and that's what we're going to have to do, because better health starts way external to the healthcare system.
Thank you, Kevin. Very true. And I think we talked a lot about various issues, I think, during the years of development, but I don't know that we actually saw far enough down the road to really have incorporated some of that. So as you say, we continue to learn and we continue to move forward. Indira, is there anything that you would like to say about the rule or its implementation that you think we should have done differently? I know you might be somewhat limited in what you can say, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Well, thank you. I think a lot of great points were raised by Dennis, Natalia, and Kevin, and agree with all of them. What's high on my mind is good ID data quality. So one more thing to add to that is I wish we had pushed more for more required data elements, if we could have, things that we let be optional, and also put in place some way to force manufacturers to come and validate their data each year on a routine basis, which would have probably addressed some of the issues we're seeing now. But I think I agree generally with everything that's been said. Mostly Natalia, I also want to throw temper tantrums every so often, but there's no one to listen to my temper tantrums, and why people still don't get such a relatively simple concept and what it can do. That baffles me, honestly. So maybe we could have done a lot more with education throughout the past 10 years to different stakeholder groups. But it was a small group that was trying to accomplish a lot of things. So in the end, all said and done, I do think we're at a great place, and great work has been accomplished by an amazing group of people, and look forward to continued work with all of you.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't think I could have said that any better. And since we are at time, I will let Indira have what is essentially the last word for a change. With that, there are, you can see there were in the slide deck, which I think will be made available, number of links. If anyone has any questions, this is obviously something that we are all, as many of you on the webinar are as well, very passionate about. You have any thoughts or questions as you work through it, please feel free to reach out. I again thank AIM and Mike, thank our panelists, Indira, Kevin, Dennis, Natalia, for your time and continued effort on this. Thank you, participants, for joining us. And with that, I will say happy anniversary, and look forward to maybe we'll do one at 15. I don't know, and see where we are at that point. So with that, I say have a great day, everyone, and take care.